Hi, this is Ashish R. Bedekar, and welcome to my podcast, The ARB Show. I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, Jason. Jason is an award winning broadcaster, keynote speaker, trainer, and journalist. He is a TV presenter for APAC Network, a radio host for 4BC Brisbane, ABC Local Radio, Money FM, and 101 FM, a digital producer for ABC News Australia, and a consultant to his own company, Cockatoo Media. For more than 2 decades, Jason has been a TV presenter for global networks like BBC, CNN, ESPN. He has held management positions at Astro Malaysia and Disney Southeast Asia, and hosted his own radio show in Singapore's Money FM. He began his career at his hometown newspaper, the Sydney Morning Herald. Over to you, Jason. Do share your life journey and your vision for Cockatoo Media.
Hi, Ashish. Thank you for having me. Cockatoo Media is an organization. It's really my little baby that with it, I work for different media organizations, both in Australia and internationally. So that includes being a broadcaster for radio and TV, but also doing digital media and training as well. So I've trained a lot of executives in how to do interviews and what to expect. And that also extends to TV presenters. I've trained TV presenters. One of the persons I trained has just been appointed as the Asia presenter for BBC. His name's Steve Lai. So he was someone I worked with a decade or so ago. So it's always gratifying to see young presenters coming through and getting good jobs.
Great, and congrats for your achievements so far. I mean, it's really great. So Jason, as we discussed on this show, we have the format where the guest talks about the top 5 trends or tips in their area of expertise. And given the fact that your institution in itself in terms of broadcasting and digital media, etc., it would be great if you could talk about top 5 tips to be a good broadcaster. And you can also, include the various trends which are happening in the industry and how, from in your perspective, what are the kind of 5 tips which someone should focus on. And I'm sure these tips will be very helpful for the audience. With that,
Yes.
Over to you, Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Ashish. Yes. So I've been in broadcasting about 40 years, starting off as a reporter for Channel 7 in Sydney. So my first tip today is preparation. So if you want to be a good broadcaster, you've got to prepare your content. Also, you've got to prepare your delivery, and you've got to be conscious of the audience that you're speaking to. So for me, that's kind of a combination of elements. So I will prepare by firstly thinking about the audience, and then I'll start preparing some of the content that I need. And it turns out that you may not need everything, but to prepare well, it gives you the confidence of handling any situation. And another way I like to prepare is just going for a walk. Let's say you're preparing for a public speaking engagement, or you're on a panel. Just go for a walk and start talking through some of the narratives that you may go through when it comes to your presentation. And that way you'll feel more relaxed. And it may not even be the same when you get up there on the stage or when you get in front of the camera, but you know that you've done your preparation. So it's preparation of both the content, knowing the audience, and the preparation of having the confidence to speak to the people you're going to speak to. Sort of different elements of that. And they always say, prepare to fail to prepare. It's actually the other way around. Fail to prepare to fail.
Right.
So that's very important.
Right. So just staying on the same topic, when you talk of audiences, what are the specific extra effort which you take depending on the audience? For example, if the audience is an international audience, or let's say an audience is a business audience, so would you kind of do the preparation slightly differently? For example, if it's an international audience, ensure that the tone or the language is quite neutral. Avoid using any idioms or things like that. So any tips on that?
Oh, of course, yeah. So if I'm doing something in Australia, then I'll use a lot of more slang and a lot more colloquial references. But let's say I'm preparing for an international audience or an audience in India, then I'll try and put myself in the seat of that person in the auditorium and think, what do they want to find out? So it's no use me just giving the same content to every different audience. So you've got to put yourself in the seat of the person who's going to be listening to you and ask yourself, what does that person really need? And if you can do that, then you're a step closer towards delivering the content that's needed.
Great, great. So let's move to the next step. What would be the next step in your view that people should really prepare for?
My second step is authenticity. It's very important to be yourself when it comes to being on stage or in front of the camera or addressing the media. I think sometimes we try and be someone we're not, and people can see through that very easily. So I think as you get older, you get more comfortable in your own skin. So it's always more challenging when you are younger to try and really be yourself. But authenticity can mean, laughing at yourself, admitting your own foibles and weaknesses, but always staying true to the message you want to deliver. And if you are not taking yourself too seriously, then you can often disarm the audience because they don't see you in a threatening way. And then you can slip in your message when you are very real and very authentic. So I think being authentic is something that I've discovered as I've gone along is very important for getting that message across.
Right. So your point which you mentioned where the audience does not see you as threatening really kind of hits home. For example, one could also say that, if the audience feels that you are not talking to them, but discussing, right, more of an informal nature, maybe the reception of the content is much better, right? So that's something which definitely needs to be taken care. So, for example, do you see that when you talk of authenticity, do you have to take some adequate precautions in a business setting versus, let's say, you're talking to youngsters? So, would you kind of have a bit of filter on the authenticity part as well?
Yeah, I mean, if you're representing a company and you're trying to get a message across, then it's going to be less of you and more about the product, more about the business. But if you're doing a talk about your own self, about your professional journey, then you can let down your guard a bit more. And of course, if you're speaking to youngsters, then that's a completely different approach as well. So you've got to be mindful of the message you want to get across. That's the important thing. You boil it down to that message and you think about how your own personal brand can help get that message across. And you need to adapt that in terms of your audiences as well.
Great, fantastic points so far. So let's move to the third point, third tip in your view.
Yes, the third point is energy. It's important to have positive energy, to be a bit upbeat, not to be monotone, to vary your delivery. I started in newspapers when I began my career, and when I made the transition to electronic media and was doing voiceovers and presentation, it took me quite a while to get the hang of that energy. My voice was very monotone, and I learnt through many years of doing it how to be engaging. And it's a bit like if you're in a party and there's lots of noise around and you're talking to one person in a monotone kind of delivery, then it's hard to get their attention. But you need to get their attention. You might be a bit more animated, and it's a lot more interesting to watch, and that person's attention is on you. So the energy is very important. And also when you are delivering, it's important not to say too much. So energy is important, but also don't overshare. And a lot of executives make the mistake when they know a lot of, there might be engineers, there might be doctors, they're very smart people, but they just give too much information in one big slab, and they do it in a monotone way. And I've seen it at a lot of conferences across Asia, and it's not interesting, and they're not able to, even though they're so knowledgeable, they're not getting across hardly any information because of the way that they're doing it. They're doing it in an uninteresting way, and they're doing it in a monotone voice. So if you can just kind of drip feed the content to the audience, it's a lot more interesting. It's a bit like having a meal. You don't want to have the massive main course first up. You might want to have just a bit of fruit and then a little bit of a starter, and then you go onto the soup and then the main course. Same thing when it comes to delivering content. You've got to do it in a strategic way, in a way that is palatable. And part of that is delivering in a friendly, upbeat, and interesting way.
All right. So many people have stage fright, right? And they're really afraid about public speaking. So any tips for them to get the energy always high? Maybe practice in front of mirrors. That's what many people say. Any personal tips which has helped you?
I don't like practicing in front of the mirror. I like to go on a walk and get that energy flowing before you do it, and just practice, walk along and just look at the birds and the trees and enjoy the fresh air, and kind of go through what you're talking about there. And it won't be exactly the same. The other thing is you can just imagine you're speaking just to one person in the audience. And that's very important. Rather than saying, hey, everybody here, just think you're talking to a friendly person, and that will make things a lot easier. So I'd say the preparation of going for a walk, or even, being in the shower, but I like walking, and just kind of going through what you're going to say. And then if you are overwhelmed by the numbers of people, just look at one person in the audience and talk to them. And if you can't see anyone, just imagine you're talking to your best friend, and rather than, thinking you're speaking to thousands of people.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I was reminded when I had the opportunity to speak at a public event many years ago. I had butterflies in the stomach, but I kind of did a similar trick to be energetic and come across as a confident person. So that's really great. Let's move to the fourth tip. What's the fourth tip in your view?
So the fourth tip today is stay in the moment. So it's a bit counterintuitive, I know, because we're doing kind of our preparation, thinking about the audience and the content and everything else, and then we're doing our walk and then going through the speech or whatever. But then we may need to change. Something may happen. You may be on stage with a moderator and they ask you a question you don't expect. It may be that someone in the audience puts up their hand and says, hey, I want to ask you this. It may be that a light falls down from the roof and you have to sort of reset. So it's a balance between being prepared and knowing more or less what you want to say, but then being open enough to change course as need be. And I think some of the worst presenters are the ones that are trying to rush through it and get to the end without making a mistake. The best ones are the ones who are present. They're in that moment, they're just thinking about the now. And that's very powerful. And you can even stop in front of the audience or in your interview and just pause. The power of the pause is very powerful. And that is being in the moment.
Right. I really like the sentence which you mentioned that, don't rush through the presentation, because the objective of any presenter, of a broadcaster, is to convey the message, right? And it's not a kind of a race to have all the points which you want to say, rather communicate it effectively. So that's really relevant.
Yeah, I think you should look at it as a privilege to do it, and rather than just feel, oh, this is nervous, I'm uncomfortable. You should look at it as, this is a privilege. I want to enjoy this, so I'm just going to tap back into the present and enjoy this, rather than just try and rush through it and tick off all the points.
Right. No, in fact, I am remembered of this famous, I think it was Ronald Reagan, who was giving a speech, and there was a balloon which kind of burst in the background, and he said, missed me, because earlier there were a couple of, some attempts on his life. But point is, he was humorous and he really brought the whole audience, in sync with what he was saying. So I think staying in the moment is a great example. What's the final tip in your view for broadcasters?
Well, the final view is dress for success and be well groomed. This is something that we can guarantee. We can guarantee that we're going to look good and that we'll present ourselves in a way that's attractive to the audience. And that will be by wearing, I'd say, classic sort of style, conservative style, avoid checks, avoid stripes. Just look at presenters on TV channels and see the ones that you like and think, wow, they look really good. They're just wearing black and maybe they're wearing a nice blue shirt and a navy blazer. And it's not the time to experiment when you are doing these kind of presentations. And with women, they shouldn't be wearing chunky earrings, and men shouldn't be wearing ties that flare out and have all sorts of designs. So neutral colors, darker colors, or even dark suit with a white shirt. You look at the way the politicians dress. They tend to dress mostly the same. It might be a dark suit, a white shirt, a blue tie, a red tie. And this is something that will, at least you starting off on the right foot, because you look good. And, I think you can get that confidence. It'll give you a first step towards doing a good presentation. No excuse for dressing badly or sloppily. Don't be too casual. I've seen some people in conferences who are just wearing a t-shirt and it looks really bad. And very rarely does anyone get any criticism if they're wearing a nice suit, a nice shirt, and something that fits well. Don't wear something that maybe you've lost weight or put on weight, it doesn't fit you anymore. Make sure you're wearing something that is well fitted and neutral colors and looks good. If in doubt, ask your wife or somebody that you trust when it comes to presentation.
True. Would you say that this again needs to be tweaked based on the setting? For example, let's say you're in a live studio environment versus, let's say, a webinar, or let's say in-person presentations. So are there any tweaks to be done, or the same kind of tip would be relevant across all these settings?
I think you can ask ahead and say, what sort of dress code is it? But I would always err on being more dressy than less dressy. So if you're at a beach resort in Bali and you're at a conference, then it may be strange to wear a full suit. They may say, wear a nice open neck shirt. But when in doubt, always dress up rather than down. That's what I would say. Because, people will go, wow, they're taking it pretty seriously. They've got a nice suit and, but do ask and also ask about the background. Is the background going to be a certain color? Because if it's a green screen and you're wearing green, you'll just disappear into the screen.
True.
It's unlikely that you'll be in front of a green screen, but it's always worth asking. Say, am I going to be on television? Is there a camera there? What's the background of the stage? And then you can adapt. But honestly, if you wear a dark neutral suit and a light shirt, then you should be okay. And ask about ties. Are ties required? What do you think? Will anyone else be wearing a tie? And that way, you'll be on the right track. And always wear good shoes too. Don't wear shoes, and wear socks, dark socks, because if you're on a stage, people can see if you're wearing white socks or whatever color your socks are. Think about your shoes and your socks, because people will look at them on the stage, particularly if they're in the audience looking up at you in the stage.
True. So, Jason, on that note, any stories which you would like to share from your rich experience? Maybe some moments where it was a tough session or a tough audience, but you moved them with your wit and charm, or some things where you had prepared but things didn't go as well, and some learnings. Anything which you can share?
Well, yeah, a couple of stories. So I remember I was the first Aussie on BBC World News. That would have been in 1995, and they relaunched. It was BBC World Service Television, and this was in London. So I was always very proud of being the first Aussie on BBC, even though there'd been previous Aussies in different parts of the BBC, but in this relaunched BBC World News, which continues today. And I was working with an Indian presenter, Anglo-Indian presenter called Nisha Pillai. She's quite a famous name in broadcasting. So she's Indian, but she grew up in the UK. And I was doing an update from Faisalabad on cricket, because I was a sports broadcaster. And I was working with Nisha Pillai and one other presenter. And I remember, for some reason, I got a mental block about how to pronounce Faisalabad, in Pakistan, of course. And I was like saying, Faisalabad. I was stumbling over it. And then I said, Nisha, how do you say that? And luckily the director cut to Nisha and she said, Faisalabad. I said, oh, thanks, Nisha, Faisalabad. So it was a really sort of special moment and a fun moment. And it kind of covered up the fact that I was stumbling on Faisalabad. So that was a moment, that was an example of being in the moment and you know, not taking it too seriously. And it was sort of a nice bit of TV. You know, there have been conferences when, you know, things haven't gone right. And Chris Evert, I actually did if you're a tennis fan, you might know Chris Evert. I was hosting they used to play the WTA Tour finals in Singapore, and I was in Singapore. So I was hosting a behind the scenes gathering with Chris Evert there at the Singapore National Stadium. And Chris Evert's very focused and very serious. And the people at the gathering were all kind of not really tennis fans. They were kind of, you know, Singaporeans love their food, right? So I was asking Chris about her favorite dishes and these kind of things. And even though Chris didn't really like talking about that, the audience loved it because I was thinking about, I mean, Chris is very focused on tennis. He was saying, you know, I want to talk about the tennis. But because I got some stuff out of her about the food in Singapore, the audience really lapped it up. So I was thinking then about what does this audience want to hear? I could tell they're not particularly big tennis fans. They're just there for the free food. And Singaporeans are crazy about hearing about their special cuisine. So that was an example where it was a bit tense at first, but it turned out all fine in the end.
Excellent. Thanks, Jason. This really gives a great perspective, and I think it's a master class of your distilled wisdom and insights. Thank you again for really sharing your perspectives, and thank you, dear listeners.
Thanks, Ashish. Yeah, I'd say one thing before I go is that it took me a long time to become a good presenter, and so if someone's watching this program and they think, oh, look, I can never be like a TV presenter. Well, I was like you, I was someone that wasn't confident, and I learned the skills, and some of the tips today are definitely going to get you on the right track. So you can do it, believe me.
Excellent. Thank you so much again. And thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in. Do subscribe, share, and like this podcast. Bye for now. Talk to you soon.